Good evening, I'm Gavin Jackson, and welcome to South Carolina ETV and South Carolina Public Radio's live coverage of Election Night 2020. The polls have closed across the state, and we have several races that we will be following, including the U.S. Senate race between incumbent Senator Lindsey Graham and Democrat Jamie Harrison, a race which has garnered national attention. We will continue to follow the votes closely and what they mean moving forward. We will also be getting live reports from several different locations, including South Carolina Public Radio's Felicia Edie at Jamie Harrison's event, and Public Radio's Victoria Hanson at the Republican Party headquarters in Columbia, and South Carolina ETV's Holly Bounds Jackson at the University of South Carolina's Social Media Insights Lab. Joining us in the studio to discuss tonight's results and what they mean are Rob Godfrey, the former press secretary to the Governor Nikki Haley, and City Bright CEO Lauren Harper. Welcome to you both. Glad for you guys to be here. Polls are closed. Is Election Night 2020. Rob, I want to start with you. Tell us your initial thoughts on what's going on right now in the state of South Carolina and what we should be watching for tonight.
I think there's a lot of excitement tonight, particularly surrounding our close Senate race that's garnered, obviously, attention around the country and around the world. I think people are looking to see how close that Senate race actually is going to end up being, particularly with all the resources that have been spent on it. And people want to also obviously see how President Trump does as he's campaigned hard for a second term.
I really feel like we'll be finding out pretty soon whether the president has won the state. Lauren, you've worked statewide Democratic campaigns before. Tell me a little bit about what you're watching, what you're looking for. We're talking about absentee numbers being so huge this year. About more than 60% of the folks that voted in 2016 have already cast their ballots before Election Day this time around. What are you watching?
Right, just shattering records and just being so excited about the momentum and the excitement behind election 2020. We're seeing people go to the polls early, and then, depending on where you live across the state, a lot of polling precincts didn't have much of a turnout today. So it's seeing, that most people did vote early. They got it in early, and they wanted to make sure that their vote was heard before Election Day. And so hopefully that will get the results back as soon as possible.
Yeah, and it seems like maybe that's indicative of a bigger issue at play here, that maybe we should be looking into expanding absentee voting. Obviously, it was expanded for no excuse absentee voting because of the pandemic. They made an excuse in the legislature to do that. They made some other changes, but we didn't see mass expansions in terms of having, drop boxes or, extended hours beyond what was already happening at certain locations. What do you think might happen go forward from this in terms of the legislature expanding things as a result of this?
Well, I think we should be hopeful that we do expand in person and by mail absentee voting in the years to come. We're seeing that if you have greater access to your ballot, you have greater access to voting early, then people are going to do it when they're given the opportunity. It's difficult for normal people to vote on Election Day. It's a Tuesday. The polls are open from 7 to 7, but that's not always easy. We have early voting, but you have to have one of the, 18 excuses prior to COVID-19, and that's not always people's reason to be voting. So we need to make sure that we can have access to the polls, like I said before, and make sure that people can vote as soon as possible.
Yeah, we've seen those long lines today, Rob. Obviously, we saw them throughout the month as well for the absentee voting. We saw, record number of people turning in ballots as well via the mail. But not so much after this morning. We got that big wave out of the way. What are you looking for in terms of, we saw some record numbers in certain counties, specifically like Horry and Berkeley County, some big numbers from 2016 to 2020 now with the turnout in absentee voting. What does that say to you at all? I mean, can you read through any of these lines and tell us if we see bigger turnouts in certain counties that we might see, a better result for certain candidates?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think it says that people are excited about the election. People were motivated to get out and vote. And look, Berkeley County and Horry County are counties that Republican candidates have done well in and depended on to run up margins in some of these most recent election cycles. And so I think that you'll want to see Senator Graham, if you're pulling for him, run up margins in those counties to try to close this thing out tonight.
And then, Rob, we've already seen some numbers come in for other states, early numbers, early AP race calls. We're talking about Kentucky going to, I think it was Donald Trump. They already said that there. And then Joe Biden winning Vermont. Democrat Mark Warner winning re-election to the U.S. Senate Virginia. We haven't seen anything come in for South Carolina yet. I'm kind of expecting an early race call for Donald Trump. It's a state he easily won in 2016. What do you think we'll be seeing sometime soon? Do you think that should be happening? Do you think that's indicative of maybe more to come, more to watch for if we're not already getting an immediate AP race call here?
I don't know that there's a whole lot to read into that other than the fact that we've known that we have two competitive races at the top of the ticket here in South Carolina this year. This presidential race has been closer than I think people expected. I think it reflects the fact that there's a pretty tough national environment for Republicans, a pretty tough national environment for the president, and also deep roots for Joe Biden and his campaign here in the state, which enjoyed a stunning turnaround victory that propelled him to the nomination here in South Carolina. So I think, it's going to be a closer night for President Trump and Joe Biden than people would have expected a year ago. But I think that's probably why you haven't seen anything called yet.
And right now I want to get us to join from Skype, from Charleston, Dean of the School of Humanities and Social Science at the College of Charleston, Gibbs Knotts. Gibbs, thanks for making time for us. We appreciate you Skyping in tonight.
Hey, I'm really happy to be here, and what a big night for South Carolina and for the nation. So we should get some results pretty soon.
Great, Gibbs, and kind of give us your read on what you're watching. You're obviously down there in that first congressional district race, that district with Joe Cunningham, Nancy Mace going on right there. We're still waiting to see results come in. It's still very early. Obviously, polls just closed 6 minutes ago. But kind of give us some idea about what you're watching, what you're waiting to see play it down in the Low Country.
Yeah, I'm absolutely looking to see what happens in the first congressional district. I mean, again, this is a district that Donald Trump won by 13 percentage points in 2016. Joe Cunningham came through in that blue wave in 2018. But this should be a district that Republicans win. Nancy Mace is a strong candidate. She's in the legislature, first woman to graduate from the Citadel. I can't find a rating agency that has Nancy Mace ahead. Everything I see has it leaning Democrat. A few folks had it as toss-up, but they've shifted it to lean Democrat. I expect Cunningham to win, but again, he's an incumbent. But this is a district that is drawn for a Republican, and so it's going to be close, and it's probably be one of Joe Cunningham's toughest tests. It's always hard to hold on to a seat when you're an incumbent the first time you run for re-election.
And Gibbs, kind of just to piggyback on that, is it surprising to you that it maybe is so close that maybe Joe Cunningham, a Democrat who flipped that seat for the first time in nearly 40 years in 2018, is holding on to it, even though the Republicans made it a top priority for this go-around?
Cunningham is a really strong candidate. He did a great job. His campaign message or theme is low country over party. And, I think people on the coast, they want someone to protect the coast and they want somebody to protect your pocketbook. And I think Joe Cunningham has done a pretty good job of convincing voters that he checks both of those boxes. And again, he is the type of Democrat that can win in South Carolina. I think he's a model for potentially some statewide candidates going forward. He put together a coalition of suburban voters, African-American voters, college-educated voters. I mean, he's got Daniel Island, Mount Pleasant, extremely high-income suburban areas, and he doesn't have to necessarily sweep those areas, but he's got to do well and build a coalition. And I'm looking forward to seeing tonight when those results come in, whether he's able to replicate what happened in 2018.
Gotcha. We'll be watching that too, Gibbs, and we'll get back to you in a moment. But let's head over to Jamie Harrison's watch party at the Hunter-Gatherer Brewery Hangar and talk with Felicia Edie. Hey, Felicia, how's it going out there?
We are getting basically Republican areas reporting right now.
Hey, Gavin. Things are going really well so far. We're waiting for people to start to arrive and fill this space. We are at the Hunter-Gatherer at the Curtis Wright Hangar in downtown Columbia. And the temperature, not as bad as it was yesterday. So for those that are coming on out, they'll be in a very comfortable space. There are some heat lamps here. But what I will tell you is that guiding this campaign or taking up a lot of space in this campaign was, of course, the pandemic. And this campaign has put into place precautions for us here. We all went through temperature checks a little while ago. We were advised and we're told to wear our masks when we need to. And even on the space behind me where people will be gathering, there are spacing designation for people there. So the Jamie Harrison that we saw during the debates and on the campaign trail traveling with his plexiglass, they're taking those precautions for the people that will come here and hopefully cheer him on to victory. So it's going to be an exciting night. This has already turned out to be an historic historic race, one of the most expensive or the most expensive Senate race in the history of the country. Jamie Harrison has been considered one of the most, if not the most serious challenger to Lindsey Graham, Republican incumbent Lindsey Graham. He is seeking his 4th term. He has easily defended this seat in the past, but Jamie Harrison, in comes Jamie Harrison. He's raised over $100 million, again, making this a historic race because it's so expensive. And then also, again, this race, Republican Lindsey Graham, if he does not defend this seat, I think it will ask the question or lend to the question that what happened to allow him to lose this seat in this heavily red state. So we're out here in the mild cool, but it's going to be an exciting night. We're going to follow it all here, and as we get more developments, we'll bring them to you.
Great. And Felicia, really quick before I leave you, I want to find out just what the crowd is going to be like out there. I know it's very tight due to restrictions of the venue and also because of COVID, obviously, we're in the middle of a pandemic as well, but any idea about who's going to be showing up there? Is it going to be pretty much just volunteers and staff, or what's it looking like right now for y'all?
So, for the Trump campaign in like a Citrus County.
The release that went out says open to the public. So when we enter in, we see that we have some guidelines for us. We all went through temperature checks. We were asked if we were exhibiting any symptoms or if we had any symptoms. We were also asked if we were in need of any PPE. As I mentioned earlier, on this field behind me where people will be at, we have circles indicating where people should stand. So it's open to the public, but they are very serious about COVID-19 precautions here.
Gotcha. Very good to hear. And we'll be back in touch with you soon. Now let's head over to Victoria Hanson, who was at Lindsey Graham's watch party with the Republicans here in Columbia. Victoria, how are you doing out there? Well, it's pretty quiet.
Hey, Gavin, good. How are you? We're finally here.
Yeah. Tell me what's going on
I heard
out
you guys
there.
allude to this earlier in the broadcast. Yeah, so, you guys alluded to this earlier. Next to the presidential election, this is probably the most watched race in the nation, and for several reasons. I mean, first of all, you have that record fundraising that Felicia alluded to, an historic number from challenger Jamie Harrison, who has raised more than $100 million to the center, $75 million, the most expensive race, Senate race. So that is drawing a lot of attention. Also, the polls, I mean, they have been going back and forth for some time now, and tonight they're still close, said to be neck and neck. And then finally, I would say, this is a time when Senator Graham has a real challenge. He's even admitted to that. He has someone to worry about. And earlier today, he sent out a campaign email basically saying that he's hearing that Democrats are turning out significantly larger numbers today. And that could bode well for Harrison. That's something he wants. He wants Democrats to turn out in larger numbers. And the other thing he wants is for people who vote for President Donald Trump, who is expected to carry the state tonight, that those people will not vote for Lindsey Graham. Of course, Lindsey Graham is hoping that, you vote for Trump, you vote for me. And then finally, let's talk about that third-party candidate, Bill Bledsoe. He's still on the ballot. It'll be interesting to see just how many votes he gets tonight and if that does take away from the senator. So the bottom line tonight, the senator, as he seeks his 4th term, he has a lot to lose. Challenger Jamie Harrison, he has a lot to gain. And the nation will definitely be watching to see if this seat turns blue in a state that has, as we know, been reliably red. Back to you, Gavin.
Great, Victoria. Great update right there. And we'll be talking more about that as well. But first, I want to go to Holly Bowdens-Jackson. She's at the University of South Carolina's Social Media Insight Lab. And Holly is with the lab's director, Kaylin Park. Holly, what's going on out there? What are you guys seeing on the social medias?
Hi there, Gavin. Yeah, this is a really exciting place. I've learned a lot today. And joining me now is Kate Park. She's here kind of in charge of this whole lab, and she can tell you all about it. So what exactly goes on here? And tell us how this plays into tonight, what we can learn about the voters and their voice.
Sure. So we are here at the U of SC Social Media Insights Lab in the College of Information and Communication. And we are doing what is called social media listening. And essentially what that means is that we sort of have our fingertip to the pulse of what everyone is talking about on social media, specifically in the state of South Carolina tonight. And so we're able to measure a lot of different things. the first thing that we look at is something called share of voice. And that means how many total mentions or total posts are we seeing about a given candidate, a hashtag, or even a handle in some cases. And now, one thing that I like to always mention when we're looking at this with politics, it's not a poll. So just because someone's mentioned the most times does not necessarily mean that they're the most popular candidate. That's why we have to look at something called sentiment. And sentiment essentially is a measurement of positive, negative, or neutral posts about a given figure or, event or topic, but in this case, looking at specifically the different elections happening in South Carolina.
What I think so neat is how you can tell this almost in real time. It's simply a refresh and those numbers start moving. I know one really in particular, a hashtag that's been so popular is that I voted. Are you seeing a lot of that?
Oh, absolutely. So we are seeing just so many people posting I voted. But something that was really unique is that we are actually able to look at data over time in this lab. And so we were able to go all the way back to 2016 and measure how many more people in 2020 are using hashtag I voted or specifically saying the phrase I voted in conjunction with one of these candidates today. And what we were able to see, first of all, is that in sort of that 30-day period before Election Day in 2016, just really nobody sharing that I voted sentiment or I voted phrase. But now in 2020, we are seeing it just every day leading into Election Day. So many users were sharing this. So that tells us that there were tons of people that were talking about early voting, especially in 2020 as opposed to 2016.
And if you were on Facebook today and scrolling through, there's no doubt you saw a lot of those stickers. Everyone just feels the need to show that sticker to show that they did their part. Really, really cool here. And talk about the social media platforms that you all gather this data from.
Sure. So primarily, this is a very Twitter-friendly software that we use, and that software is called Brandwatch Consumer Research. Essentially, though, beyond Twitter, we are able to look at public-facing Facebook pages. So different news, news Facebook pages, so not unlike South Carolina ETV or local stations here in South Carolina, but then also national outlets. So I'm not able to measure if someone on their personal Facebook page says, I voted or I support this candidate. But if they did create a comment on an existing public page, I can measure that. This is all public data. We're not mining anyone's Facebook or their private data. It's only publicly available and only on these different social platforms beyond Twitter and Facebook, a little bit of Instagram as well, some blogs and forums, and even Reddit, which has become a very popular sort of sounding post for a political conversation.
All right, Kate Park from U of SC's Social Media Insights Lab. Now, coming up, we're going to be talking about the numbers that are coming in from specific races, and quite fascinating the way that they have changed throughout the years. Gavin, we'll take it back to you.
Great. Thanks, Holly. We've got a few numbers coming in, and I want to be specific. They are just a few. We're talking about a couple hundred votes so far, and then we're just looking specifically at the presidential race here in South Carolina with 184 votes for Donald Trump so far and 150 for Joe Biden. And this is just what we're seeing right now from results in South Carolina. We're still waiting to see way more results come in. Obviously, polls closed just more than 15 minutes ago, so plenty of time there for these to be tabulated. And we do know that absentee ballots have been counted throughout the day. The election officials had an actual 2 hours to count these ballots this time around. But Rob, I want to kind of go back to what we were hearing from Victoria. Obviously, still waiting to see these results come in. But when we talk about the third party factor for the Senate race and how Jamie Harrison was trying to get folks to, support Bill Bledsoe in the Constitution Party, obviously he had dropped out of the race, but his name still appeared on the ballot. How do you feel like that might affect this race, especially when we're talking about, single-digit percentage points that could possibly be the difference between winning and losing for Senator Graham?
I think it'll have a negligible effect. I think that at the end of the day, the ads that the Harrison campaign and the Democratic Party began to run a few weeks ago were a little bit too cute by half. I think that they took for granted the fact that voters are informed and they're smart, and that they can see through these things. So I don't know that those ads ended up having the desired impact that they had. But what they did do is they united a group of conservative activists in the upstate who began to hold public events, over the last few weeks to say, hey, actually, we're not voting for the third party candidate. We're perfectly happy to cast our vote for Senator Graham in this race. And so it could very well have backfired on Jamie Harrison in these last few weeks.
And Rob, that's something super important that that Graham needed. I mean, remember back 2014 during his primary, he had 6 other challengers he had to fend off who were more conservative than him. The Tea Party was such a crucial factor back then. Now they're coalescing around him. Is that just because there's so much at risk when we talk about the Senate and especially in South Carolina?
I think what you saw was, well, first of all, it's worth pointing out that Senator Graham, in the primary this year, only earned 68% of the vote, which I think some people saw and said, is there a little bit of weakness on the right, which I think the Harrison campaign rightly diagnosed and began to try to exploit with some paid media in the upstate over the course of the summer and into the early autumn. But what I think you actually saw with the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett, these court battles, they motivate both sides. But in a state where conservatives and Republicans, for now, continue to outnumber Democrats and liberals, I think that was an advantage for Senator Graham. It united conservative activists around the state, particularly in the state around his campaign, and motivated them to come out for him.
Yeah, and Lauren, just kind of let's pick up on that a little bit about just how important that Supreme Court nomination process, the confirmation process that Senator Lindsey Graham oversaw in his Judiciary Committee. How big of a role did that play in maybe bringing folks back to thinking about exactly what Senator Graham does on their behalf? I mean, being one to help get all those judges confirmed has really become just a big talking point that it seems to have motivated a lot of his base. It came at the wrong time, apparently, for Jamie Harrison, unfortunately. Yeah,
I would definitely agree with that. I think a lot of voters not only look at the candidate as someone they want to elect, but what they're going to be doing. Obviously, we know Senator Graham is the chair of the Judiciary, and so he has a very large influence on what goes on with the Supreme Court nominations. And so if we want to think about not just the next 4 years, but the next several decades of what our country will look like, what laws will pass and what laws will not pass and what laws will be overturned, people are really concerned, and I think thinking about those things, and they place sometimes their preference for that Supreme Court nomination over even the candidate times. I think that could have played a role a lot of it.
And Lauren, really quick before I go to Victoria, I want to ask you just about, we heard about the state being red, but we're also talking about a statewide race here where we're talking within single digits when we could possibly have a Democrat win there. What do you think about the state of the state in terms of the demographics, the parties, and maybe what it takes to turn this state maybe purple, maybe blue, in your opinion?
Yes, for the purple. Yeah, I think that, a lot of people are moving to South Carolina. We've seen that over the past 4 to 8 years that our demographics are changing. There are more women voters in the state, and there are more younger voters in the state, and we're also seeing changes in even just the electorate year to year. So, we're seeing that this year, I saw the numbers recently for South Carolina, that more older African-American voters have voted in 2020 than they did in 2012 for Obama. And so we're seeing just this big momentum. We're seeing an increase in female voters. We're seeing a lot of first-time female voters. And so we're seeing that is going to be a huge element in who wins this race.
Yes, women are very key. I've read about that. We talked about the 100-year anniversary of the right to vote for women, and you just realize just how key they are to everything, not just in South Carolina, but in the state when it comes to voting. I want to go to Victoria Hanson, who is at the GOP Watch Party, and she has SC GOP Chairman Drew Mckissick with her. Hey, Victoria.
Hey, Gavin, I do have the state Republican Party Chairman Drew Mckissick joining me right now. He's been, let me pull this up. He's been kind of making the rounds around the room. I've seen you on some of the big screens, and thanks so much for joining me for these couple of moments. So tell me, just how important is this race tonight?
Incredibly important, not just to us here in South Carolina, but for conservatives around the country. Senator Graham has played an incredibly instrumental role in confirming well over 230 judicial nominees to the federal court, district court, circuit court, now the U.S. Supreme Court. It's a vivid reminder for conservatives here and around the country that elections matter.
The polls have just gone back and forth, over the summer and the spring, showing them close, showing one ahead and the other ahead, and they're still neck and neck. Do you guys pay much attention to the polls, or are you worried about them tonight?
The only poll that matters is the one that's taking place today. Polls, even when they're done well, are just a snapshot in time. You can only use them as sort of a guideline and, what kind of progress you're making, whether your message is actually sticking or not. What we have seen throughout this campaign, though, is Jamie Harrison raised and spent a lot of money. About 97% of it's coming from outside of South Carolina, folks who hate the president and hate Senator Graham for supporting the president's nominees. We get that, but you've got a point of diminishing returns for that kind of money on TV ads, and to us, the ground game is what's really been instrumental. The Democrats have had no ground game in this cycle. That's the first time I've seen that in 32 years of working in politics. We've had a ground game. In this cycle, we've had a spectacular ground game, probably about 5 times bigger than anything we've ever done in the past. And that has enabled us to actually make contact with voters and get them to the polls. And that's what we've seen made a difference for us in the early voting so far, and we think will make a difference tonight.
Yeah, I know COVID has played a role in that. Jamie Harrison's campus said they're extremely concerned about that. They've been doing more virtual rallies and whatnot. Tell me, what did the senator do today? I know he was with his aunt in Seneca. That's where he voted?
Yeah, and I think since then, I think maybe he hit a few precincts perhaps, and I think that was about it. And I was with him over the weekend. He had a bus tour. We hit a good number of sites around the state, and he was in great spirits, very energized, more so than I've seen him on the trail before.
And final question, this race is getting so much national attention. Again, it's because of that record fundraising, because it's become the most expensive Senate race in the nation.
I mean, that used to be a presidential campaign budget, and they're spending that in one state here in South Carolina, absolutely. But, at the end of the day, people have to be willing to buy what you're selling. And he spent a record amount of money doing warm, gauzy biography ads or ads that attack Senator Graham. What he hasn't done is connected with voters in South Carolina on the basis of issues that folks in this state really care about. I mean, this is still a conservative state. Even according to Gallup, conservatives outnumber liberals 2-1 in South Carolina. Republicans outnumber Democrats. I mean, just last week he had an ad, a video that he cut or that Barack Obama rather cut for him. You bring in a presidential candidate that lost South Carolina twice, that has all that liberal baggage late in the game, tells me that they're worried about turning out their core voters. Then they spend probably several $1 million in the last 2 weeks trying to get people to vote for a third-party candidate instead of Senator Graham. I mean, when you start spending money trying to get somebody to vote for someone other than yourself, that tells me you're getting desperate.
You were going to my next question, but just to wrap it up, I mean, basically, I think the senator has been pointing out that, yes, he's raised a lot of money, but a lot of this money comes from out of the state. It comes from people who may not like him, but people who can't vote. They can't vote here.
More and more may not. They do not. Yeah, that's why. And look, I mean, and of course, all candidates are raising money from out of state. I get that. But the percentages in Jamie Harrison's race have been just incredible. And again, this is, what you would normally think of as a presidential campaign budget. But no ground game and not connecting with voters on the issues and trying to sell it as a biography, if you will, isn't cutting it. I mean, he ran all those ads and didn't mention the word Democrat one time, and this man's co-chairman of the National Democrat Committee. That tells me he knows that being a Democrat is not a resume enhancement in South Carolina.
Thank you again for your time, Mr. Mckissick. I see somebody waiting for you saying, hey, the next reporter in line. So hopefully we'll catch up with you a little bit later on in the evening. Best of luck to you guys.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Back to you, Gavin.
Great. Thank you there, Victoria. And I just want to let everyone know that we are looking at election numbers on our website on scetv.org. We are following the AP numbers. It's scetv.org/election-2020. You can see what's going on in the Senate race. You can see what's going on in the national race. I just want to update you right now with numbers that we're seeing. We're about 1% reporting, and so far about 7,475 votes for Lindsey Graham, 2,900 votes for Jamie Harrison. Again, very sporadic reports. It's just 1% reporting. Still very early in the night. We're going to have a long night, folks. And I kind of want to ask Gibbs Knotts down there in Charleston, Dean Knotts, I should be saying these days, because he got that promotion, just what exactly he's looking for in results and how long this race might take to be tabulated. When we talk about record turnout, we're talking about mail-in, we're talking about in-person. Gibbs, how long do you think this could take, especially since it's going to be so close, apparently?
It's a great question. So I think, so many people, record numbers of people voted by mail, and we were allowed to start counting those mail-in ballots this morning at 9 a.m. And I read a report from Horry County that they expected to have everything done by tomorrow, but may not have them done tonight. Normally, if the mail-in ballots and the early voting kind of were evenly distributed, just like the same-day voting, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. But there's pretty good indication that Democrats were more likely to vote by mail this time around. And so I think it's really critical that we don't jump to any conclusions, that we be careful and not just see what the numbers look like, but see what types of voting methods are being counted and being released across the state.
Yeah, and Gibbs, we're also looking at down in Dorchester County in your neck of the woods. The Post and Courier reported about more than 13,000 ballots having some issues because of the ink and scanners not being able to read them. They will be counted, but just not tonight by their scanners because it's going to take some time to count that many ballots. But I want to ask you something really quick before we go to our guests in the studio, just about polling and numbers, because I think a lot of people, might still be a little burnt from 2016 when it comes to polling and trusting polls. What can you tell us about looking at those, especially when we look at the close polling in the Senate race over the past few months?
Polls are just a snapshot in time, and as long as every South Carolina voter has a equal chance of getting called, they give you a pretty good indication. But if a poll is, it could be that Harrison's up by a couple points in a poll, but there might be a margin of error of 4. That means that really Lindsey Graham is ahead, and so you always want to look at the margin of error and probably not look at any one poll, but if you see a trend among several polls, that can, I think, tell you a little bit more about what to expect. Polls got a really bad rap in 2016. I guess I would point out that they did correctly predict Hillary Clinton as the popular vote winner. It's just that they were off in some of those really, really key states where it was extremely tight and ultimately allowed Trump to be the winner in 2016.
Mm-hmm. Rob, I want to pick it up and talk about your experience running statewide campaigns in South Carolina. You were with the Haley campaign back in 2010. That was a close statewide race right there. We're talking about 4 points between her and Democrat Vincent Shaheen. That was obviously a decade ago. Things have changed. It wasn't a presidential election year. But could we see something similar to that happening tonight when we look at the Senate race?
I think we could. South Carolina is not as ruby red as conventional wisdom really here in the state and outside the state would say. There is a coalition of Democratic voters that can be motivated, that can be mobilized, that can be turned out amid the right circumstances for the right candidate, particularly given the resources that Jamie Harrison and Democrats have had in the state this year. And so I expect this to be a margin of error race, which is something that would have been crazy to think about, just a year ago. But Jamie Harrison's had the money to tell it, to talk about himself, to tell a compelling story. I think he's put in a lot of work. But to be clear, Republicans have put in work here on the ground, too. They've made millions of phone calls. They've sent out millions of text messages. They've door knocked. They've touched voters. And so I think that, yes, this race will be close. I think that, Jamie probably peaked a few weeks ago, and I think that was a function not just of the two candidates themselves, but the national environment with Amy Coney Barrett. But absolutely, these races in the right environment can be close, not just with the race between then State Representative Haley and Senator Shaheen, but just think back to 2006, we had a 400 vote margin race between Karen Floyd and Jim Rex, the closest race in statewide history. Mm-hmm. So there's a history of close races here in South Carolina. Like I said, the dynamic has to be there, the money has to be there, the candidates have to be there, and mobilizing those voters and turning them out has to be there.
Lauren, is everything there for Jamie Harrison? I mean, we're talking about, I think more than $140 million is maybe what's all said and done when it's done. You heard Drew Mckissick, the chairman of the GOP, say he hasn't really done the groundwork that's needed to be done. Obviously, we were in the middle of a pandemic. You can't really do as much as the Democrats would like with such money coming to their coffers, especially the state party. But what do you see happening with Harrison's campaign? What do you saw over the past few months?
Yeah, I would say Harrison's campaign has done a phenomenal job of engaging with voters. So, yeah, the direct voter contact in person may have been less this year because of COVID, which is smart, I will say. Yeah, but I will say that I don't know anybody who didn't get a text from Jamie Harrison, and they were contacted repeatedly. So it's like, making sure that they were contacted, they see his ads, they see him on YouTube, they see him on the television. So it's like, Jamie Harrison, I want to get, I've seen people on social media saying, let's just elect him so I can stop seeing him. And I really think that's a sentiment for a lot of folks because they're excited about his candidacy, excited about having an option, and excited about potentially replacing a leader who has not necessarily been able to stand up for South Carolinian people for the past several years. And
you heard Rob say that he thought that campaign maybe have peaked 3 weeks ago. Obviously, we were really in the thick of it back then. I will agree with Drew Mckissick talking about how Lindsey Graham seemed to have a pretty good energy this past weekend. I was on the campaign trail across the state at some of his events. Also went to some of Jamie Harrison's events. A little bit of different dynamic between both of them. But what do you think in terms of the energy that between both of those campaigns? Well, it's exciting, to have even this as an opportunity. I think that South Carolinians get jaded by a Democratic candidate sometimes because they're like, well, hot dog, he's great, but he's probably going to lose. And that or he or she, I'm sorry. But, we have these candidates. We have a candidate like Jamie Harrison this year, and they have this hope saying, wait a minute, this could actually happen. And just, seeing some of the sentiments and statements that Senator Graham has said over the campaign trail, you say it's exciting energy, yet a lot of people see some of his remarks and say,
what is going on, what year is he living in, and so wanted to see, not just a generational disconnect at times, but also, a complete ideology disconnect that he may have.
Gotcha.
So.
Well, let's see what some people are thinking. Let's go to the Social Media Insights Lab at the University of South Carolina and talk to Holly Bounds-Jackson. Holly, what are people talking about out there?
Hey there, Gavin. Just at a press of a refresh button, we're going to see these lines move, especially now because people are really starting to talk. Here now with Kate Park from the Insights Lab. And talk to us about these numbers and these graphs behind us. And specifically, we're talking tonight right now about the Senate race.
Sure. So the first thing that I think everyone should know about the South Carolina Senate race is that it has definitely been the closest of the races that we've been watching heading into the 2020 election. Jamie Harrison, I think, has always really fared well on social media in terms of gaining that positive sentiment. But up until, I would say, about the midsummer, he really could never break through in the number of people talking about him. But however, in August, when we were measuring this information, we really saw that shift for Harrison. And that's when he started competing pretty directly with Lindsey Graham in terms of total media mentions or share of voice, as I mentioned before. But today it's been a little bit different. Leading into the election in October especially, every day it was just a matter of what happened to see how many people were talking about these candidates. But really, as soon as the polls opened, around 7 o'clock in the morning, we did see mentions for Jamie Harrison start to increase. And that really continued throughout the day, with Lindsey Graham kind of following closely behind him, but still Harrison really occupying that share of voice. However, right around 5 o'clock, so when people are starting to get off work, or if they didn't have, work off today for Election Day, we did see the spike for Lindsey Graham where he was kind of being the most talked about candidate in sort of that rush hour. But now Harrison is back on top with those mentions.
And I love seeing these word clouds over here. What's funny to me is that the emojis come in as well. Exactly. Tell me what we're seeing today in terms of that Senate race with the words.
So this is really a visualization of the conversation in South Carolina. So this not only gives us that sentiment and that share of voice that we're talking about, but it gives you really those feelings and emotions that maybe you don't see in this hard data, right? So you mentioned the emojis, you see the wave, people talking about a potential blue wave, people talking about a wave of red in South Carolina. Many, many people sharing vote, that they voted, that hashtag I voted in here as well. But then also, you can't really see so well right now on the screen, but also hashtag Jamie Harrison appearing, hashtag send Lindsey home appearing, but also hashtag Lindsey Graham appearing. And then people sharing just general patriotism, the American flag, talking again about that civic duty of going out and getting out the vote. So again, getting that visualization of what people are saying and feeling.
Now, I know you said that this is not a poll. We're very clear about that. But historically, what does it say whenever, someone's maybe most popular on social media? Does that tell us anything about the results historically?
Sure. So one thing that I can say is that we are not able to prove cause and effect. I can't necessarily say that because this many people talked about Jamie Harrison that he will win in the poll. But we can show correlation, and it is a very good way of seeing, again, that barometer of emotion and feeling. Where is the excitement and where does it lie? And typically with share of voice, it may not seem immediately like that may be the most important thing to measure. But when we were looking at the South Carolina Democratic primary, there was actually Biden and Sanders were really neck and neck in terms of that share of voice. But then the day of the election, immediately, as soon as the polls opened, everyone was talking about Joe Biden. And then sure enough, within 2 minutes, he was declared, the South Carolina Democratic primary nominee. So again, it's not about cause and effect, but it is about correlation. And what we can, I think, very effectively say is that there has been excitement around the Harrison campaign, and he really has utilized social media as a tool for his campaign.
Right. Kate Park from USC, and such insightful information here at the Social Media Insights Lab. Now, coming up, we're going to talk more about the presidential race and what the people are saying on social media, and also how the demographics has changed on these social media platforms in the past few years. All right, we'll send it back to you now, Gavin.
Thanks, Holly. Thanks, Kate. And we want to go ahead and bring up a graphic here to show you what the results are already looking like in the state of South Carolina, with just 1% votes reporting right now for the U.S. Senate. You can see that Lindsey Graham, incumbent Lindsey Graham, has 67.8% of the votes coming in, and Jamie Harrison has 29%. I will say this is only about 15,000 votes for Graham at this point, 6,500 for Harrison. Still very early. We already know that, more than 1.3 million absentee ballots have been cast, and we're talking about 21,000 ballots right now. So go ahead and hold your horses, pack your patience. Gibbs, I want to talk to you really quick down in Charleston. Obviously, these are very preliminary numbers. Obviously, they will change throughout the night. But what do you think when it comes down to it? We know hours from now, what it might end up looking like in terms of how close this race may be, and kind of give us maybe some historical perspective on that.
Yeah, so Graham won by 17 percentage points in 2014 during his last election. He went against Brad Hutto, who's in the state legislature. I mean, I think if it's in single digits, I mean, that's certainly way better than the Democrats did last time. You know, again, I just think that'll be very disappointing given all the money and all the hopes of so many people. But yeah, I mean, I think anything, you know, within 5 percentage points, I think is, you know, Democrats can realize they can learn a lot. Obviously, it'll take a lot of wind out of their sails if it comes up to and approaches double digits. I mean, I'm expecting something a little bit closer based on all the polling. But, you know, as has been said tonight, it seemed like a lot of momentum was shifting back towards Graham in the last week or two of the election.
Mm-hmm. And that was something that you were talking about there, Rob, in terms of the momentum we're seeing. But I want to maybe switch gears a little bit to what we're seeing nationwide for the presidential race, maybe what you've been looking at, hearing, your thoughts overall in terms of what maybe we could be seeing tonight nationwide when it comes down to the race between President Donald Trump and Joe Biden.
Yeah, I think we've got some critical states that are our neighbors tonight. Georgia, North Carolina, which have been hotly contested by the campaigns, as evidenced by the surrogates and the candidates themselves that they deployed over the last week into the race. You can tell where they believe the important places to go are by who they send. And so I'll be looking at Georgia, North Carolina, obviously Florida, but also Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, those places that we hear people talk about every time someone still talks about the 2016 campaign. Mm-hmm. Those states are critically important. They represent a narrow path to victory for the president. I'd imagine those are the states his team is focused on. And by the same token, I imagine they're states that Vice President Biden's team's concentrating on too.
And I just want to go ahead and give people an update here in terms of states we've already seen called by the AP. I know I mentioned some earlier, Vermont going for Joe Biden. We've seen West Virginia and now Kentucky going for President Trump. But we just saw Virginia being called by the AP at 7:36 for Joe Biden. So again, folks to the north there. Lauren, we are not Virginia. We are not North Carolina. We are South Carolina. We're not Georgia. Talk about those demographics. We've talked about that in terms of what needs to happen in South Carolina. You hear a lot of the Democrats in the state talk about trying to replicate what we saw in the 1st congressional district in 2018 and having that spill over maybe into the 2nd congressional district this go around against Joe Wilson. How hard is it to replicate that statewide, though, when it comes to flipping the state around or working towards doing that?
Yeah, I mean, thanks to gerrymandering, our states, I mean, our congressional districts are drawn pretty strategically, so it's very difficult, depending on where you are, to win, whether you're Democrat or Republican in that seat. So it depends on the congressional district. It depends on the counties involved. It depends on the candidate even. I think we need to think about that as well, because, you know, we have a lot of, obviously, Republican and Democrat people who live in South Carolina, but we also have unaffiliated voters. We don't register by party here in South Carolina, obviously, and so we can't say, you know, who is who, but there are people who exist who are unaffiliated, and I think that they're going to be a significant contribution to what happens, not just in the congressional district across the state, but also for the statewide and for the presidential race.
And Lauren, kind of tell me about maybe what you've talked to friends, talked to family about, talked to voters about in 2020. You know, I've been around talking to voters across the state. It seems like there's a lot of fear on both sides. You know, whether you're a Republican, whether you're a Democrat, everyone seems pretty fearful about what could happen if, you know, the president wins and holds on, or if Joe Biden wins and holds on. What's your read on how the country's doing right now in 2020, November 3rd?
Oh, we are quite unsettled, to say the least. Here in America, I think that's no surprise. A pandemic comes through and wreaks havoc. But I think America very desperately desires a sense of security to be restored again, regardless of who is in office, but a sense of security. And so I think that could have contributed to even who people were voting for. And so, you know, do I want to have this sense of security with President Trump or with former Vice President Joe Biden? I don't know, you know, obviously what will happen tonight or even over the next few days for that matter. But I think that that's probably a big contributing factor to what's going to be on the ballot at stake here.
And Rob, really quick, just your thoughts on where the country is right now in terms of, you know, being so divided, these big issues, this pandemic going on. What's your read on the state, the country, in terms of how people are feeling?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Lauren had to say. I mean, we're divided. I think we do seek leadership at a national level that can bring us together to get us through this pandemic. By all accounts, we're about to see a spike in cases. I think that makes us unsettled. That makes us fearful. I think that people, regardless of the outcome of the election, would like to see national leadership that brings us together instead of exploits what divides us. And that'd be my wish for the country too. I think it's the same thing here in South Carolina. Luckily we have a governor here whose tone and whose tenor and whose leadership style is different than the president's. So regardless of whether you agree with everything that the governor's done, you can't say that he doesn't do his best to bring us together, particularly in times of crisis. And I think that America's looking for leadership like that nationally.
Gotcha. Very interesting insight from both of you. I appreciate that. I want to go to Victoria Hanson, who is at the SCGOP watch party in Columbia. Hey, Victoria.
Hey, Gavin. Yes, I'm at the Alumni Center at the University of South Carolina, and the Republican Party is holding a watch party, a party for Senator Lindsey Graham, and of course other Republicans across the state. Joe Wilson just walked in the room. He's behind me doing some interviews with other reporters. I'm told that there's a VIP party going on upstairs, that people will begin to kind of fill in the room about 7 o'clock, and that they're going to cap the crowd at about 500 people. They did take our temperature as we walked in the door, so there are some concerns about the coronavirus. But I really enjoyed listening to you guys talk in the social media room about the differences between Harrison, between Senator Graham, and kind of what people are saying on social media. And Gavin, I know you and I have been out talking to voters across the state, and you talked to voters who said, I will use the senator's words against him and will not vote for him. But, in Charleston County, which actually, Joe Cunningham won the 1st Congressional District 2 years ago, a Democrat for the first time in decades. I talked to some folks in Charleston County who said, I didn't used to like Senator Lindsey Graham. I didn't like him before. I like him now. I like him being for the president. I think he's really serving our nation now. So you have to remember, there are people who do like kind of this Lindsey Graham, so to speak, and we'll just have to see how the vote turns out tonight. But again, the watch party expected to get underway tonight at 7 o'clock here at the Alumni Center of the University of South Carolina. Back to you, Gavin.
Great. Thank you there, Victoria. And we want to go to Felicia Edie, who is at Jamie Harrison's watch party, also in Columbia.
Hey, Gavin. Yeah, we're at the Hunter and Gatherer hangar here in downtown Columbia, and we're still waiting for people to come inside. But we have those CDC guidelines in place for people, so when they do get here, they can have fun and celebrate safely. Temperature checks are taken. We got ours taken earlier today, and also there is spacing for people. Our guidelines are spacing for people when they start to populate the field. That's right behind me. There's a really huge screen here, so people can stay connected with the results as they come in, and immediately behind me is the stage where you will have our candidate when they do come out. But earlier today, I got the opportunity to talk with some people from the Harrison campaign, and Jamie Harrison spent the earlier part of today visiting precincts in Florence and in Richland County, talking with voters there, and getting to just, again, gripping and grinning with the people that he's been trying to introduce himself to during this very long campaign season. The spokesperson for the campaign told me that he's been running his campaign trying to let people know that he is a candidate for South Carolina, and that's what he's been trying to drive home with people this entire time, letting people know that his story is so much like their story and their concerns are so much like his concerns, and that's the reason why he wants them to vote for him. This has been a very interesting race. I think it may have snuck up on some people. The Republican incumbent, Senator Lindsey Graham, he's seeking his 4th term. He has easily defended the seat in the past, and of course many people know that South Carolina is a consistently red state. But this cycle around, we have Democratic challenger attorney Jamie Harrison, and he has outraised Graham. He's raised a lot of money. Many of you at home have seen the product of all of those funds with all of the ads that we've seen after your programs. We've seen a lot of ads recently, and then also the amount of money that has been raised in this race has made this the most expensive Senate race in the history of the country. And I think that's something to pay attention to. But also the question is, will Senator Lindsey Graham hold on to this seat? And if he does, what does that say? What does it say about the people who went to the polls early and the people that went to the polls today? And if he does not, what does that say about the people in South Carolina as well? Is there a change in beliefs or in value systems here in South Carolina? The results that we see tonight will start to answer some of those questions. Back to you, Gavin.
Great. Thank you, Felicia. And we want to go to Holly Bounds-Jackson, who is at the University of South Carolina's Social Media Insights Lab, to get another look at what's going on out there on social media platforms.
Hey there, Gavin. Yeah, Kate Park from the Insights Lab just running right up because literally these numbers are just coming in. She's going to give us the latest and greatest report. So specifically right now, we're going to talk about the presidential race. So what are you seeing online? What are people saying?
Well, so one thing that I will say immediately is that a lot more people are talking about the presidential election than they were that South Carolina Senate race. We've already analyzed over 22,000 posts with probably about 3,000 unique authors. So that means these 3,000 authors posting a lot of information about these candidates today. So a lot of South Carolinians talking about this election. But the number one name that we are obviously seeing is President Donald Trump. And that's not necessarily surprising. However, in the days leading up to this, I will say there was probably a bit more of an equal spread in terms of those mentions towards Vice President Joe Biden as well as President Donald Trump. But today, the day of the elections, Trump is definitely the number one talked about figure in that election. And probably the number 3 trending topics are all in some way related to voting for Donald Trump.
You know, for so long, there's been that idea that it's more of a younger crowd who's hitting social media and making these remarks. Has that demographic changed throughout the years?
Definitely. And that's something that we like to call the Trump effect here in the Social Media Insights Lab. Really, with the advent of the Trump administration, we really just saw this huge flux of users who were not only older, but definitely were more conservative. So sometimes when people see these numbers, they say, oh, well, these are younger users, they lean liberal. And that is really not the case and what we've seen in South Carolina. And evidently tonight, you can also see that as well. Trump is definitely the number one talked about candidate, and people are expressing their enthusiasm for casting a vote for him in South Carolina.
All right, Kate Park giving us so much great information. Appreciate your help tonight. Gavin, we'll send it back to you.
Great. Thank you all for that. Now I'll bring up the latest numbers we're looking at right now with the Associated Press. We have about 3% reporting right now at the Senate race. And those numbers, you can see about 61% there for Lindsey Graham, 37% for Jamie Harrison. I'm seeing some updated numbers on SCTV's website, which is a great resource if you want to follow along and see what's happening in the state and across the country. That race is tightening up a little bit more. I'm seeing on ours with 3% reporting, it's about 51% Graham, 47% Harrison. Obviously, just 3%. We're talking about 70,000 votes out of a couple million that still need to come in. But Rob, I want to talk to you really quick. We have about 8 minutes left on the show. Talk about State House. You know, you have state representatives, you have state senators.
Yeah.
That's what they do in Columbia here. You've worked in the State House with the governor, Nikki Haley. You've been around a long time. You know how this works.
Sure.
And these are important folks to have up there, too. Obviously, we're looking at about, I think, out of the 124 state House seats, 43 have major opposition. Everyone else is pretty much skating to re-election. Over in the Senate, there's 43 Senate seats up out of the 46 with the incumbents, and 27 of those have major opposition. So we're not expecting too many fireworks, but what are you looking for? I don't think we're going to see any big flips when it comes to Republicans versus Democrats at this point. Anything you can get a read on?
Yeah, I think, the big story tonight out of the state legislature is some competitive Senate races. And I think that the environment, the money that's come in, the top of the ticket excitement has made some Senate races competitive, particularly in the low country. Talking about Senator Larry Grooms, Senator Chip Campson, and the race to succeed Senator Paul Campbell down there, all in the Dorchester, Berkeley, Charleston County area. You know, you've got the Senate race, you've got a competitive congressional seat. That's all driving lots of turnout down there, and those are all competitive Senate. Senate races where, in 2 of them, Grooms and Campson, you've got well-funded Democratic challengers who've been up on TV and the mailboxes and the phones. Making a race out of these things. So I think those are some races to watch, although I think that the Republican candidates will be okay there. In addition, closer to the upstate, you've got a Spartanburg Senate seat where Senator Glenn Reese, who's a Democrat, has escaped Republican challenges over the years, but has a strong one this year, and a guy named Josh Kimbrell, who's a well-known radio show host. Josh has come on strong lately. Republicans are bullish on that race. And in addition to that, Senator Floyd Nicholson in the Greenwood area, who's a really well-liked, beloved senator down there, has a challenger, and I think his name's Billy Garrett. And he's another race. That's another race Republicans are bullish on. And speaking of races Republicans are bullish on, the race up in the Lancaster area for Mandy Powers' Norrell's seat has been unexpectedly close, I believe. So there's some state house races to watch, and there's some state house races to watch because we've got so much excitement at the top of the ticket that people are fired up and energized and voting up and down the ballot.
Yeah, Lauren, just kind of piggyback on that. When we talk about, that kind of momentum trickling down, obviously we're talking about the money from Jamie Harrison's campaign. We're talking about tight polling in that race too. What does he need to do in terms of trying to get some of those moderates, some of those moderate Republicans to attract not only to his side, but to, these other races that Rob's talking about there? What do they need to do, and do you think that they're going to accomplish it this go around?
Yeah, I think that the messaging is obviously the most important and critical factor here. It's, how can you make a compelling argument to people who traditionally or historically have voted Republican in a way that would make them disagree with or not vote for Senator Graham this year? And that could have come down to a lot of different things, whether it was COVID-19 response or his support of President Trump or, his support of all these different policy issues that South Carolinians have taken so seriously, particularly during a health pandemic. So I think that, if you can hit the sweet spot, have the secret sauce or whatever it is, to talk to those voters, then you would do a good job of that.
And Gibbs, I want to bring you in here too and just talk about a little bit what Rob was talking about in terms of state house races. Obviously, the state senators are up every 4 years, state representatives are up every 2 years. But again, we're talking about a lot of action down there in the low country, a lot of turnover, a lot of tight races. Is this some sort of SCO1 effect playing out right now?
I think so. I mean, keep in mind, Charleston County, went to Barack Obama in 08 and 12, Hillary Clinton in 16. And so it's been trending blue for a little while. But again, what's going to happen in Berkeley and Dorchester, some of the surrounding counties. But I think you're exactly right. It's the trickle down from all the money being spent in the Senate election, plus a competitive SC1 race with an incumbent Democrat trying to hold on. I think all that's helped South Carolina Democrats, low country Democrats. I mean, I think they don't really think they're going to flip the state legislative seat, House or Senate, but I think they're going to be more competitive and just try to gradually chip away at the Republicans' advantage that they have in the state House.
And Gibbs, I'm gonna hate to say goodbye to you. I know this has been a very quick hour, but before you leave, I want to ask you just really quickly, maybe 30 seconds here, what viewers should be watching for in the state and also nationwide with your expertise on politics here?
I think I'm really focused on the South. I'm really curious to see, the Republicans have dominated Southern politics since 2000. Barack Obama won a few states, but, can the Democrats win more than just Virginia? I think Virginia looks like it has been called for the Democrats, but if it's just Virginia, it's just a repeat of 2016. But if Democrats can get Georgia, if they can get Florida, that's going to really change the landscape of Southern politics.
Great, thanks, Gibbs. And then it looks like I was just informed that the Associated Press has called South Carolina for President Donald Trump. Not too much of a surprise there, Rob. We have about a minute apiece left. I want to get your final thoughts maybe on that news and then also what you'll be watching on into the night.
Yeah, not a surprise to see the president carry South Carolina State E1 by almost 15 points last time. I'm sure the margin will be a bit closer this time. But, I'm going to be watching the Senate race. I'm going to be watching those legislative races I mentioned. I'm going to be watching the margins that Harrison could potentially run up in places like Charleston. I'm going to be watching the margins Democrats can run up in that district for Joe Cunningham. And I'm going to be watching to see how Senator Graham does in some of these places where he focused that bus tour in these final days, up in the upstate, down in the PD and on the coast.
And then, Lauren, also to you, what you're watching for, and maybe, if Jamie Harrison doesn't win this race, what that means for the future of this Democratic Party in the state of South Carolina, if he even, if he gets into certain single digits there, what that might mean going forward, next statewide races we see in 2022.
Absolutely. Well, very excited to see the different congressional candidates we have across the state, from Adair's race and Kim Nelson's race in the upstate. So excited to see what happens there, because those are some really strong races. But to your point about Jamie Harrison, I do believe that he can win. But if for some reason he doesn't, we're excited. But if for some reason he doesn't, it's just a matter of us getting better infrastructure as the Democratic Party here in South Carolina. It's us getting better at making those compelling arguments and having those messages that will bring out voters.
Which he will, especially with all that money that flew into his coffers, and some of that went to the state Democratic Party coffers too. So thanks again to all of our guests in studio via Skype and all of our reporters out in the field, Holly, Felicia, and Victoria. We appreciate your reporting. And also stay tuned for the PBS NewsHour's special election night coverage. We will be back at the top of each hour to look at local and statewide results. For everyone at South Carolina ETV and South Carolina Public Radio, I'm Gavin Jackson. Good night.